now I'd like to transition to Mark Sirangelo, the CEO of Sierra Nevada Space Systems, and importantly also the Chief Innovation Officer for the state of Colorado. Kelly Kwan, who's down here in the front, has been with the KIN for some time and was the founding executive director of the Colorado Innovation Network, or the COIN, which was born out of KIN. The governor, John Hickenlooper, came and said, man, we need something like this in Colorado. Kelly took that on, helped to build it. It still exists today. Peter Bryant, my friend, partner, and KIN co-founder, is part of the advisory board there. And Mark Sirangelo is now in charge of making innovation happen not only in Colorado, but also in space. With that, Mark Sirangelo.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm really thrilled to be able to start this program and be able to talk to you all a little bit about two things. I have a great life. I get to run a space company and go explore the galaxy, and I get to be the innovation officer for the state of Colorado, which is a volunteer job, though sometimes it doesn't feel like that. But it has a portfolio to allow me to look at so many different things within the state. Kelly and others who have started this effort in Colorado really had set a great foundation. And we are moving forward in many ways. And today I'm going to take you a little bit on a journey, if I can, from the Earth to the galaxies and back home again. Just by way of background, my company Sierra Nevada is, as was mentioned, is a new company in many ways. It's not a new company in terms of age. We've been in the space business now 26 years. We're about 3,000 people. We are privately owned by the management of the company. We have no outside investors. We don't owe any money. We basically run ourselves, which means that we're responsible for our own mistakes and can't blame it on anyone else. And that's a pretty good place to be in many ways. But probably more interesting in our industry, which is a pretty tough industry. We've been growing 20% a year for a lot of years. We've been profitable since the 90s. And we've been to space now over 420 times. So we know a little bit about how hard that is. What I'm going to talk about today is not so much the company, but the process and what is really a growing trend, which is a government public-private partnership. You've all heard the words. We happen to be in the middle of probably one of the most interesting, expansive, and maybe unusual ones. We do our business around the world. We now have operations in 26 different countries and really are looking at this as a global way of viewing things. But for our business, it's beyond global. We actually have been throughout the galaxy, throughout the solar system. We have been to 7 planets, the sun, the moon, and a number of other places, including my favorite, which is Pluto. That mission, just to give you a sense, it takes about 10 years to go from Earth to Pluto. We launched something now 2005, and next year in June we will have the first view of Pluto. It was so long, it takes so long for that mission, that when we launched that particular mission, Pluto was a planet. And one of the saddest moments of our lives, we had to phone up the little spacecraft and tell them, Pluto. Yeah, it was so long, it takes so long for that mission, that when we launched that particular mission, Pluto was a planet. And I'm really lip syncing. In case I wasn't here, they were really prepared. I mean, you guys do a terrific job. Considering I didn't write this out, that's even more amazing. But it's the echo bouncing off of Pluto back. And we had to phone up the little spacecraft and tell it that it wasn't really a planetary mission anymore. And I'm on a little bit of a cause, a website to make Pluto a planet again. Think about going to Disney. You know, Pluto's not going to be there anymore. It's really a tough thing. But I want to talk a little bit about change, because that's really what we're here for. And this is a pretty famous picture, a world-changing moment. And I like to think of things as world-changing moment. Anybody know why? Yeah, you know?
First time we'd seen our planet.
Yeah, it is the first time that a human had taken a picture of an Earthrise and saw our planet from a distance. This was one of the Apollo missions. The astronaut, pretty much by chance, saw this coming up, took a picture, and was in the history books. But why is it a world-changing moment? Because it was really, by most people's standards, the start of the moment where we decided that our Earth needs to be taken care of. Much of the ecological movements, many of the things that we see today, recycling, all those kinds of things, can draw their roots back to people realizing that all these 7 billion people that were talked about a little while ago live on that little blue dot. And people really started thinking differently about what that meant. And in space, we have an interesting world that we live in, and that we see things from a different perspective quite a bit. And what I mean by that is that if we were in space right now, if I were piloting our space plane, as I'll talk about, all the space above us would be usable. we think of things different. There isn't an up and down. There isn't a sideways. Everything is done in a different perspective. And sometimes that different perspective really helps. One of my favorite moments recently was that I got to give the award to John Glenn for recognizing his 50 years since he did his first flight. And this saying here, some see things as they are and say why, and I dream things that never were and say why not. John was a fascinating guy. He actually went to space once for about 2 hours, became quite famous as a result of that. I was the first person to orbit the Earth. Came home and the president said, "You're too valuable, you can't go to space again." And that sort of ended his career, which was not a really happy moment for him. But then he went on to be a senator and he spent his life in public service. But that wasn't the end of the story. He lobbied for many years, and a number of years ago he became the oldest astronaut to go to space. He went up at 74 years old, and he had to fight his way to get to do that. And he went from being a one-person little capsule where he couldn't move to being inside the space shuttle. And he had the perspective of the beginning and now of that space program. It was quite an interesting journey. But many of us, if I would say who started the business of airplanes, I think most of us would say the Wright brothers, which is true and to a point, but it's not actually the full story. The full story is, I'd like to tell, real change comes from collaboration. We're going to talk about collaboration a lot over the next 2 days. But collaboration was interesting. I don't know how many of you know this picture, but the picture on the left is Alexander Graham Bell, who was actually the inventor of the airplane. Silence. Alexander Graham Bell was obviously known for many things. He was an audioist. He spoke about, he taught people who were having hearing problems, and he actually invented the telephone and many of the inventions, his early inventions, because he was in love. It's a great love story. We talk about love here too at this event. But his wife, his name was Mabel, was a student of his, and he was trying to figure out a way to communicate to her. And he wound up inventing the telephone as a result of that. They lived together. They had a great marriage for 50-some-odd years. She became his muse, told him what he should do, what he shouldn't do. And towards the end of his life, she said, "You know, Alexander, this thing about airplanes, lighter than airships that they called it at the time, it's going to be big. You need to go look at and put your mind to it." And he didn't want to have anything to do with it, but she sort of forced him to do it. 2 good things came out of that. One, he went to go visit the Wright brothers, and he said, "Let's work together to figure out how to solve your problems." And the Wrights had a pretty big problem. They learned how to take an airplane off, and they did the very famous flight. The problem is that airplane couldn't turn. And that's a little bit of a problem with airplanes. You do want to turn occasionally. So they had a little bit difficulty figuring out how to turn the airplane. Alexander figured out a way to turn airplanes. He wanted to collaborate. The Wright brothers decided they want to do it on their own. They didn't want to collaborate, and what could have been a wonderful partnership didn't work out. So he went back and he said, "Okay, let's figure out how to do this differently." So he did 2 things. He collected the first group of people in this picture that created the first aerospace association, and he created what is now known as an X Prize. His wife put up money, basically money she took out of his pocket over 50 years, put up a prize for $100,000 to the smartest group of people who could figure out how to solve this problem. They got together, built this thing on the bottom, and what Alexander did that made him famous, everyone who's ever been on an airplane can say thank you, he popularized, he didn't invent, but he popularized the idea of hinging an airplane, the rudders, the ailerons, the flaps. And that made modern airplanes possible. And the entire airplane industry came as a result of that. The Wrights get the credit, Alexander got all the money. This is a picture of talking about innovation being audacious. And I like to think of audacious things. I live in a pretty audacious world in what we do for a living. This is what we fondly call our beach ball. But the first set of Mars rovers, called Spirit and Opportunity, that were really, really successful, we couldn't figure out how to get them to Mars. And after quite a long time, a number of ideas, actually a large group of people like this came together, came up with all these crazy ideas. And the pitch was, at the end, we're going to take your billion-dollar rover, we're going to put it inside this inflatable beach ball, we're going to drop it out of a spacecraft, it's going to hit the surface of Mars and bounce 10, 20, 30 times, it's going to roll, and like a Weeble, it's going to right itself, the airbag's going to open up, and the rovers are going to drive off. And pretty much when we made that pitch, everybody looked at me like you guys are looking at me like, what are you, crazy? In fact, that's what happened. It happened twice, worked twice. The rovers were up there for about 10 years apiece. One is still working. And it was because a group of people who were completely unrelated to the space industry came up with this very unique idea of how to get us to another planet. That then led to a program that was just landed. Some of you may have seen 2 years ago. We landed on Mars with something called Curiosity. Curiosity, as government programs tend to do sometimes, the 2 rovers that we sent, Spirit and Opportunity, 10 years ago, worked perfectly, so we needed to redesign them. And we redesigned it to be 4 times as big because we, in all seriousness, we want to do a whole lot more. This vehicle is effectively going to look for life. It's looking for water, but water lives life. In water lives life. And it's 4 times as big as the previous ones, could not go in the same beach ball because there wasn't enough capacity to do that, and it needed to get to the surface of Mars in a different way. So a very collaborative group of people, over 40 companies got together, figure out how do we get this thing to Mars and how do we make it work. And if I could go back, I want to show you just a brief video. And this is, before we start the video, I look at life in moments of where were you moment. Because I think sometimes when we look at how valuable things are, I think as this event has been over the 10 years that it's been going on, it makes you stop and pause and realize that you can do something really special. So what you will see here in a moment is really, in many ways, the beginning of human exploration of other planets. We've been doing it for a long time, but this is really the first practical step in what will be, I think, a very long step of things. So if we can run the video. My company was involved with this program, and we realized it was going to be pretty special when people from all over the world started getting together. It took us about 9 months to send something to Mars. And what happened was that the entire world started watching. Universities, libraries, movie theaters, Times Square, all are connected to the same moment in time. So we understand tens and tens of millions of people were watching this event going on, which was a little traumatic because my company did the last 1 minute of the landing. So we realized that about 100 million people or so were going to see us fail or be successful. And the buildup was tremendous. A little bit anticlimactical because it takes about 8 minutes to get something, a message from Mars to the Earth. So whatever we saw, it already happened before we saw it. But nonetheless, we sort of pretended that it didn't happen. And as it came in quite rapidly. And you'll see the emotion of a lot of people. And what these people represent is about 6,000 people from around the country, around the world, who worked on this project for almost 8 years. And all that energy, all that emotion was falling into a couple of minutes. And each step along the way, we were getting images of what was going on. And what you're actually seeing here is video from the spaceship. And you're seeing a lot of very stressed people who hadn't slept in weeks. We couldn't put this on a beach ball and drop it down, so we actually literally dropped it from a spacecraft and let it find its way to Earth on its own. And as it gets closer and closer, the tension builds and builds, and we realized that we are about to land not only just a mechanical device on Mars, but something that's actually going to start looking for a way for humans to maybe live in a different planet. And we start realizing that this is a pretty special moment in not only our life, but the life of what we may have for the future of this planet. And that's what happens after 9 years of working. This is the first high-definition picture from another planet. And you start looking at it and you realize, well, this, what you're looking at is actually the most sophisticated mechanical robotic arm that drills into the surface. It has 6 degrees of movement. It can look around. It can do things. And each one of those devices has a different type of drill to it. And that's all wonderful, technical, spacey kind of stuff. Why is that important? Because we're taking all that stuff and putting it into the next generation of prosthetics for what might be human intervention from being able to make people be able to live with injuries, particularly military injuries. All that technology, all that work is finding a new home. And that stuff gets into our hearts when we do the work that we do. This is our next robot that we're building. The world is changing in many ways, and sometimes information flow, we've seen how much data is coming in, but we're also changing the way in our industry and space where we might go. The era of space tourism is about to begin. Several companies are going after that. We're involved with a program that's being fronted by Richard Branson and Virgin Galactic. We're helping to build this. There are 740 people who are signed up to go to space on this already, which is about 130 flights. In the history of space from every country, in the entire history, there have been about 560 people who have gone to space in 60 years. So in the next year or two, there will be more people going up than there had been in the previous 60 years. And these are people from all sorts of walks of life, artists, people from media, from different walks of life. And we're also building a new infrastructure. Spaceport, a word that you will hear from, has already been built. The first one has been built in New Mexico. It is an airport for space. Even has a Starbucks. So to finish up in the last few minutes, I want to talk about a public-private partnership that's unlike any other. A few years ago, NASA realized that it needed to change its way of looking to the future. And the way they did that was quite courageous, quite innovative in many ways. And they decided that instead of the government, for the first time, owning its own vehicles and owning the space program, it was going to go out and partner with and contract with private industry to do things that had previously only been done by government. The big mission here is that we have an international space station. It's the size of a very large football field, and it's a laboratory. It's now a national laboratory where research is going on continuously. And instead of the US government, through its space shuttle program, going up and supplying and bringing people and cargo up there, they were going to turn to private companies like mine to be able to do that. It's a huge step in thinking in the way process, and particularly for an organization like NASA. But they came up with a series of priorities for this public-private partnership model, positioning the private sector at the forefront of space activity, advancing key technology capabilities, creating progressive partnerships, being able to inspire the next generation of students, not only in science and technology, engineering, math, but inspiring students as a whole to dream, to think big, to go a different direction, and to ensure that the government's interest in all this is followed. That was the key of this public-private partnership. The space shuttle, which had been around for 40-some-odd years, was retired. And in that retirement, then they said, let us break it into two pieces. Let us go out and bring people who can bring cargo up and people who can bring people up. My company is involved in the side of the business that is bringing people up. And they're constantly going out thinking about this public-private partnership model, being able to put together services together with being able to understand that the private sector can do many things that government used to be able to do, and do them quite well. So we in our audacious move, at the time we were a little under 100 people, came up and said that we think we can build a replacement for the space shuttle. The company was headquartered in San Diego at that time. We've since moved to Colorado. But it was quite a big move, I think, for all of us as we were thinking about this. But the idea was that we realized that this could be done. This could be possible with the right kinds of momentum, right kind of move, right kind of money, right kind of support. It might be possible. So we created a vehicle we call the Dream Chaser, because we were chasing our dreams quite rapidly. And we built it on a forefront of NASA technology, being able to take a vehicle, turn it into something else, using the history and the background. And as we talk about public-private partnerships, one of the really important things is not something that you cut off and move on. It's a transition. Take the good from the past, take the energy from the past, and try to mold it together with something that makes it better and makes it stronger for the future. But we did it through creating a huge set of a team. And that team was quite unusual unto itself. It is the ability to go out and realize that the hardest thing in many ways is that you're not an expert in everything. We have to realize what we do well, what we don't do well, and how that makes a difference. And we went out and created this international team, starting with the United States and branching out, of now 15 industrial companies, 6 universities, and we even went back to the government. We contracted back with the NASA centers in the government. In effect, a dream team that can create for the future a different way of being able to make this happen. The program now has over 30 states involved, employment in 30 states, including Colorado, which is our home and our forefront. And one of the interesting things is that now Colorado, by most measures, is either the first, second, or third largest aerospace state in the country. And it is highly likely that the next American who goes to space will go through one of 2 programs that exist in Colorado. You would not say that normally. The state of Colorado, the people involved in the state went out and said, we're going to encourage aerospace, we're going to encourage technology, we're going to encourage innovation. And by doing that, a number of companies, including my own, moved into the state and called it home and began expanding there. It was really forefront thinking by the leadership in the state. and continues to this day by the methods that's going on. And what has that done? In many ways, it's helped the state enormously in its perception, in its place as being a technology center, in its place being as a home for innovative thinking. It's also done things like creating jobs, really serious jobs. Our unemployment rate is now down to 6% in Colorado as a result of this and many other moves. And we also went out and went global, and we now have the Europeans involved with this program. The Canadians are soon to be involved. The Japanese are being involved. And the private sector is creating that type of international partnership, which had once been the forefront of something that a government agency like NASA was doing. If you could run the video. So this is done to give you a sense of how that would work, and then I'll close off here. The ability to do something like this, to change the perception, to change the way people look is quite a challenge. And what we've been able to do, working together with our partners and working together with government, is to look at how does that done from every step along the way, from the computers that we use, from the people that we hire, from the ability to look at the technology that goes into this, and source from so many different sources those types of technologies. We went back and used government facilities where we could use the government facilities and be able to contract them. The vehicle itself was designed and created, and this is not something that's a perception anymore. It's actually a reality. We are starting to do that flight with NASA, and we're expecting to go into service here very shortly. And you'll see the different, just quick elements that go into building something like this. Quite a complex set of opportunities and technologies. What's most fun is that we've gotten universities involved, and there are now over 100 different students who have come in as interns who now are working on some part of the program. And I said the biggest thing that came out of that is my Red Bull consumption is quadrupled in my company. As long as we keep feeding it to them, it works really well. And we went out, and you can see the vehicle is quite different in that it gets carted around by a truck. It's a different look to it, and the testing was done out in a place called Dryden, which is in California, in the Mojave Desert. And instead of using a very expensive vehicle to pull things around, we used a Ford F-450 pickup truck. So you go through and you really look at the program and you start saying, what can you do to change your perception, change the way that you do things? And it's become quite the exciting program, not only for us, but for the country. There's well over 1 million people who now follow this. And what we see out of it mostly is that it's not so much people who want to go into being a space person or technologist like I am, but it's people who get inspired. And that's really what we want to do with these kinds of programs, with many of the things that we're talking about today, is create that inspiration that lets people move on and make our world a different and better place. This is a tool to be able to do that, and that's really where it starts. As we talk about going through space and going through the solar systems, I like to bring it back to a really simple saying. Gandhi said something I think applies to many of the companies as I read through the different people who are speaking here today. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And I think as we look at the simple things that go through each of the elements of the people who are going to speak over the next 3 days, you will see that theme, that thought, that process from a very simple man at a very simple time applies to something as complex as what I'm doing, and I think applies to most people who are here today. At the end of the day, what it's really about, I think, as many of the students are here, if you can find something that you can do that you fall in love with. Asimov was one of the most famous science fiction writers of all time, and he used to say quite rapidly, or quite frequently, if he was in heaven, he'd do exactly what he's doing right now forever. And I think that's, at the end of the day, if you find something in your life, if you find a home, a job, a person, and you can say that to yourself, that's really what the fulfillment of all this journey that we go through is about. And I like to end on one of our favorite pictures. This is a picture that was taken to welcome home the space shuttle, and it was done purposefully so that the people who were flying the shuttle could see as they came home. And what you can't say in this picture is you can't see people, who they are, where they're from, what their backgrounds are, if they're from government, what country they're from. It is a team, and it's a team that was there for a purpose to do something that was very, very special. We like to say when we're flying, when I'm in space, we actually go around the world. We go about 17,500 miles an hour when we're in space. It's a little faster than you can go on the Ryan Expressway, right? But that means that you go around the world every 18 times a day. You see 18 sunrises and 18 sunsets every day. And you start thinking life very differently that way. And you realize that our journey through this, the walk that we do, really needs to be one that we do together. It needs to be one that has collaboration and partnership, which is why this program and this effort that has been put together is such a wonderful experience, because we can see that different change, we can see those different perspectives, and hopefully that makes us all better. So thank you very much for letting us have this chance today.
Mark, before you leave the stage, I have a question for you. You showed the quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which I just love. And forget about the when they're ignoring you part. When they're laughing at you, you've been through that. What turned the tide? What stopped people from laughing?
I think when they realized that we weren't going away. But
then you're just a pain in the butt.
Then we're just a pain in the butt. So that's why that saying is so important to us, because it is being able to overcome that. Because many people, when we said initially we're going to build a replacement for the space shuttle, people just laughed quite a lot. And then we had some drawings and some designs, and they just looked at it and ignored it, saying it was never going to work. Then all of a sudden we started testing it. Then all of a sudden it started becoming real, and said, well, now it can't work. We don't want it to work. You shouldn't work. This is not any good. And now that we're doing it, everybody wants to join it. So it's really that kind of journey.
Well, a great innovator said to me once, when people are telling you there's no way that's going to work, then you know you're onto something special. So
all right.
Thanks
Thank you
again.
so much.
All right. So the more things change, the more things stay the same. I didn't know the story of Alexander Graham Bell and the first X Prize, but that's certainly what it was. And I have to admit, seeing that moment of landing with millions of people watching and 6,000 people around the world coordinated to make it happen made me tear up a little bit. The reason it made me tear up is at one moment as it was landing, I realized that that was the monolith. Mark mentioned the fact that this lander is intended to understand Mars in order to figure out whether and how eventually we as human beings can live elsewhere. And if you remember 2001: A Space Odyssey, the monolith arose. It landed on Earth. Friends, we are the apes. We are the apes who are inspiring ourselves. Thanks so much, Mark, for sharing that. It's really exciting what you're doing.